Welcome back. Citizens Climate Lobby is a climate change organization that's existing to create a political will for a livable world by enabling individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal as well as political power. Their approach to climate education is designed to create a broad, sustainable, and healthy foundation to drive climate action across all geographic regions and political inclinations. Joining me now to discuss more is the volunteer at Citizens Climate Lobby and retired Foreign Service Officer of the the U.S. Department of State, Arthur Zegelbone. And Arthur, good to have you.
Thank you, Daren. I'm happy to be here. I know that you recently had two illustrious experts on climate change from Manhattan College and from 350 New York City. So I'm honored and happy to be here as someone with much less expertise.
No, Arthur, I've got expert number 3 sharing with me today. So I'm glad to have you with me. We're gonna have a good time. And listen, I want to thank you, first of all, for being here, but let me get at it because when we talk about climate change, how are you seeing climate change from your perspective?
Well, your former guests mentioned a lot of the issues that we're already suffering. You also mentioned the 2006 movie that former Vice President Al Gore produced called An Inconvenient Truth. Inconvenient is the operative word. Climate change is inconvenient both for the people who are suffering from the effects of it, but also from the interests that stand to earn a great deal of money from the current situation of how we use our fossil fuels. We saw in the paper today that in Texas, people are suffering from a heat wave that's reaching 110 degrees. People are dying from it. The smoke blast that we received in New York City a couple of weeks ago is now hitting Chicago and likely to come here. And we're still suffering the effects of Super Hurricane Sandy. People who were least equipped to bounce back from it still have not bounced back. So we already know and feel the effects that climate change will bring to the world, but we face a certain resistance to doing the things that need to be done. And I feel that's where Citizens Climate Lobby comes in, is equipping citizens to stand up to that challenge.
Yeah, you bridge the gap for me because here you are, Citizens Climate Lobby, and you're doing that work. And really, when we talk about the work, give us, from your perspective, what that work consists of in terms of making an awareness, because there's so many people, as you said, you mentioned the show before, so many people, you talk about climate change and it's in one ear and out the other, but for us, we live it on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, it's true. And I think that there's a general knowledge among people that this is the case, and yet a lot of differences of opinion about what to do. When I left the State Department and I was looking for something to do, one of the things that had impressed me from living in various countries is the countries that seem most successful to me are the ones in which citizens are engaged in affecting their own lives. And so I was looking for an organization that also took that to heart. There are 3 kinds of pieces of conventional wisdom that I go by that I think Citizens Climate Lobby also believes in. One is money talks. Another is if nothing happens, nothing happens. And the third comes from the Talmud. If not you, who? If not now, when? So Citizens Climate Lobby recognizes that there are vested interests that don't feel that they would like to inhibit the acceleration of legislation that would help us with climate. And they understand, for example, in the last year, the 5 largest oil companies in the United States reaped a profit of $200 billion. ExxonMobil, in the first quarter of this year alone, just the first quarter, the first 3 months, reaped a profit of $11 billion. That money's great for their investors. Some of it is shared with society, but they are producing a product that in the long run we know, and even in the short run, even today, is hurting us. So what do we do in the face of that kind of power? In this country, money and power go together. We understand that. In Congress, among our congressmen, although many are of goodwill and come to Washington with the idea that they would like to change things for the better, uh, a lot of their time is spent on guaranteeing or trying as well as they can to guarantee that they will be reelected. For that, they need money. The Supreme Court agreed in 2010, had a decision called Citizens United that allows corporations to spend unlimited funds, not directly to candidates, but to political action committees and to help candidates advertise themselves. They advertise themselves in order to get votes. So the philosophy in Citizens Climate Lobby is, you want to see the votes? You better talk to the voters. And there are 420 chapters of Citizens Climate Lobby around the country, 150 in other countries as well. And their primary mission is to go to their congressmen as constituents and say, here's what I want you to do. Perhaps you're being supported by other interests that would like you to do otherwise, but here's what I expect from you.
Yeah.
And so far, we feel some traction.
Well, Arthur, when I think about the work that you do, I know that programs and workshops are also a part of that component. You talk about the education and really getting out to the political forefront, talking to legislators, elected officials, making them aware about the situation with the climate. But also on the backside of that, you do spend time in programs and workshops with your clientele. Talk to us about the workshops and the programs that are going on to further your cause.
Yeah, I've been involved with other nonprofits. I'm also very interested in politics, and I've worked with some political nonprofits, also some arts nonprofits. This is the best organized nonprofit I've ever been engaged with, and they have decided that they want to educate the volunteers who work for them, the several thousand people who work for them, so that they can go to their representative with confidence and say, here's what I'd like you to do, here's why. I know that you've heard some arguments to the contrary, and here are some counter arguments. We recently, a week ago, had a national conference in Washington, D.C. 900 people showed up from around the country. It was as diverse as you could imagine. There were, of course, as there are in a lot of nonprofits, a lot of retired people like myself, but also high school students, college students, a diversity of ethnic backgrounds, conservatives, and liberals. And one of the things that I like about Citizens Climate Lobby is that there is room for respectful disagreement. Not everybody agrees on every point. It's a complex issue with lots of ramifications that needs to be talked out. And the volunteers who work with Citizens Climate Lobby find it necessary to know both sides of every issue, so that when they do go to a congressman or congresswoman, to a congressional representative, they have the goods.
I'm smiling because here it is. I'm thinking that we got a lot of partisan politics going on in Washington, D.C., as you know, but you just talked about the diversity that you have. You talked about how you're able to navigate that and to be able to effectuate change, and also where it is, given the fact that, hey, we don't always agree. How do you get that? To translate to Washington is one. That's another show all by itself. But how are you able to actually achieve that within the organization? Because I think if you really do the homework here, it sets the tone for a lot of other areas in life where we see diversity of thought, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of all of that, and still be able to come out and get the bottom line done.
You're absolutely right, Darren. I mean, this right now, more than ever in the history of this country, is a critical issue that we need to get by. We're at a period in history where, and it's not the first time, and we've had other disruptions to American democracy, but there are threats to our democracy. my feeling is, particularly from attending something like Citizens Climate Lobby Convention in Washington, that most Americans are not extremists, but somehow the extremes get the most attention, some of it, and I have to say this to you, although I do believe that BronxNet is an exception because you're bringing in so many speakers that are able to speak their minds. But the media, to some extent, has uplifted the extremes so that the impression of an extreme country, extreme politics being the norm has taken over when I think it's not.
Yeah, not offended here. There's good media, there's bad media. We're glad that we can fall on the public television side where we can bring diversity of thought and a voice. And sometimes that's exactly, what's needed. Is we need to have that diversity and respect people's opportunity, right? I mean, you're not going to always agree, and we have to learn how to just agree to agree and sometimes agree to disagree. From your look, what should we, the public, be paying attention to in this moment at this time?
Well, the prime issue that Citizens Climate Lobby is promoting in Congress is the idea of a carbon fee and dividend. There is an act that is being put forward in Congress by Congressman Carbajal from California called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. What this would do would allow the government to charge extraction industries, oil, coal, and gas, at the wellhead, a certain fee for the amount of pollution that this substance will create in the world. And that fee will be distributed among American citizens, in some part to counteract the result of the fee, which will be to raise the price of oil and possibly raise some other prices, but there will be an equal distribution as a dividend to American citizens. It's the one issue, although we realize that there are other possible solutions to these problems, Citizens Climate Lobby has decided to focus on just a few issues because it makes it more powerful to bring that to our legislators. Along with carbon fee and dividend, they're very interested in healthy forests and in urban reforestry. There's the concept of tree equity, which I'm very interested in. I live in Riverdale, and one of the reasons I live here is that there are more trees than people. And it would be nice to see that around the Bronx and the city. And in fact, trees are good for the climate. They're pushing building electrification, e-vehicles, heat pumps in buildings that will use less fossil fuels. And the other idea that's being pushed now is permitting reform. That is to make the process of permitting new energy resources to speed up the process that the government has of permitting them. It can take up to 5 years to allow new pipeline, for example, or new electrical wires to go through the country. The permitting will be done, Citizens Climate Lobby insists, with local input. So there are those four, one major and then three other issues that we have been bringing consistently to Congress. In Washington, there were 400 meetings with congressional offices to talk about these issues and to persuade members of Congress that their constituents were serious about seeing them do something.
When you talk about Congress, talk about elected officials and this particular matter, when it comes to climate change, when it talks about green space, how attentive are we finding our elected officials to be? I mean, we talked about before how when Al Gore was sounding the alarm, it seems as though a lot of people didn't give that ear or wrote him off. Now we're looking years later, we're saying, hey, you know what? Former Vice President was right. There's some things we really need to be paying attention to. But when it comes to those who are elected right now, what kind of response are you getting from people as you continue to lift up your voice?
You're right, Daren. That was the Al Gore movie came out 17 years ago, with some very clear scientific evidence that this is what we were facing. I do think it's human to put off solutions unless you're feeling the pain. I think we are feeling the pain now. I do think there's responsiveness there, but there is responsiveness in which there is real action that has a real result, and there is lip service. I think almost everybody in Congress, I think there are very few now who are denying that climate change is real. I think there are very few now who are saying that this is not caused by human action, by what we're spewing into the atmosphere. But there are members of Congress now. I mean, the current Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a whole host of climate-friendly funding that is a part of the act. The act was done as budget reconciliation, which is a political kind of sleight of hand that means it can't be filibustered, and it was passed 100% by Democrats, and not all Democrats. There are now members of Congress who are working to take some of the aspects of that act apart, challenging them, trying to push them back, because they know and they are supported by interests who are negatively affected by climate-friendly action. So Congress is at least embarrassed to say, no, 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 there's no climate problem when people are dying in Texas. They have been disproven so many times about the idea that there is a human element to climate change, but they're hoping that there's little attention to the specifics of what they're doing. We just had a primary election here in New York City. Primaries are very important, particularly in New York, because the Democrat in New York City always wins the election. The primary is the only election that makes a difference. About 10% of the voting population voted. I don't know if it makes a difference, the vote itself, but I do know that politicians take a look to see how active are my constituents, how closely are they paying attention to what I do. And this is what I would recommend to anybody who says, I don't think things are going well. The more local your representative, city council, state assembly, the House of Representatives, President of the United States, don't bother writing to him. But for the representatives who depend on your vote, listen to you. And I suggest to people that that's the most satisfying route you can take to trying to make a difference.
Arthur Zegelbone, we'll have to leave it there. And if you're just joining us, he is a volunteer at Citizens Climate Lobby and also retired Foreign Service Officer for the United States Department of State. And we thank you for your service and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Daren. It was a pleasure.
Great conversation. Of course, glad to have you. All righty. We are taking a quick break, but guess what? We'll be back with more right after this.